we still haven't really decided whether we want to be friends with Beijing or we want to be calling them an enemy. That's fundamentally what this comes down to. It would be a lot easier for everybody, in this case, to have said, yes, China is an enemy, and passing, as the Mail pointed out, passing secrets to them would be a bad thing to do. But just as we've got rows over the Chinese potentially super embassy in Tower Hill, we've constantly had rows about how well treated Chinese diplomats, Chinese figures should be when they're in London, whether we should regard them as a threat, whether we should regard them as a friend, and we are just fundamentally confused.
Let's start, Andy, with a story that is going to run and has indeed been running a while. The Director of Public Prosecutions has blamed the government for the collapse of the Chinese spying trial, which was said to go ahead this week. Stephen Parkinson said the government failed to provide evidence that China was officially considered a threat to UK national security at the time of the alleged offences, which meant that the two people accused were given not guilty verdicts when the case collapsed. Keir Starmer, who was himself a former DPP, of course, has responded well on his way to India. He said the government couldn't have changed history to designate China a threat in 2022-23 when the alleged activity took place. Andy, look, this all seems to be based on a bit of a legal technicality, but it's odd that the threat posed by China could be so widely acknowledged by intelligence leaders, yet still sort of deemed legally improvable in court.
Which is a symptom of Britain's complicated relationship with China and the way in which, years on from talking about this for the first time, as China became, a great economic power, we still haven't really decided whether we want to be friends with Beijing or we want to be calling them an enemy. That's fundamentally what this comes down to. It would be a lot easier for everybody, in this case, to have said, yes, China is an enemy, and passing, as the Mail pointed out, passing secrets to them would be a bad thing to do. But just as we've got rows over the Chinese potentially super embassy in Tower Hill, we've constantly had rows about how well treated Chinese diplomats, Chinese figures should be when they're in London, whether we should regard them as a threat, whether we should regard them as a friend, and we are just fundamentally confused about our approach to China, and this is a symptom of that.
I mean, and it's a confusion that goes back a really, really long time, because I can remember not only George Osborne's outreach to China. I remember when the Beijing Olympic torch came here and appeared on the steps of Downing Street with Gordon Brown, and he was surrounded by Chinese heavies looking like a bit of a sort of, a hostage, and you could see there was something very, very complicated there. Look, the government's been accused of basically of the reason why they failed to designate China as a threat was to protect diplomatic relations directly. The government has denied this. But, I mean, do you think, does Keir Starmer have sort of questions to answer there to clarify that, about whether that is maybe a bit true?
Well, I think what's fascinating here is you've got what is now basically a public row between the DPP and the government. And as a rule, we want to avoid that. They are obviously independent of each other, but you'd like them to be at least on the same page in some form. What I think Keir Starmer has tried to do is basically say, not me, Gov, this is the previous government's problem. We had nothing to do with it. Sorry, move on. And perhaps he's right from a legal perspective, but certainly the current DPP is of the view that the government could have been more helpful. It does get a bit technical and it does get a bit legalese, but brass tacks, a national security case has collapsed in pretty embarrassing fashion. And unless there's full transparency on where, how and what, then these questions are going to keep being asked of both the DPP currently and of Keir Starmer.
And I mean, and you have people who are, who were accused who are walking free because a case couldn't happen. You spent a long time as a journalist in the city.
Yeah.
Capital C rather than small c. You're still a journalist in the small c city. This is, never mind. How important is Chinese money to the British economy? How to what extent are people generally prepared to sort of abase themselves for Chinese money?
Chinese investment is vital to the UK economy, and it's only going to become more important going forward. It isn't the be-all and end-all. There was a period about 5 years ago when I was working in the big C city where it was felt that there was, just almost too much Chinese money going around the city, too much Chinese investment. That, I think, has slightly changed, mainly because there isn't a lot of investment going into the UK economy generally, regardless of whether it's from China or the US or whatever. But the big C city cannot separate itself from the second largest economy in the world, and a driving force behind basically the only element of global growth, which is Asia.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
主席候选人习近平赞成2952票。请全体起立。请宣誓。
我宣誓，忠于中华人民共和国宪法，维护宪法权威，履行法定职责，忠于祖国，忠于人民。
坚决反对一切形式的暴力。